This is Known Podcast, hosted by Dustin Bennett, the lead pastor of Known Victory Church in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Known Podcast is dedicated to helping you grow closer to Jesus, unleashing the power of your creativity, and developing you as a leader. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Welcome back, Known Podcast. So excited again that you're joining us today, Season 2, Episode 2. It's going to be great, and we want to start a conversation on fear. We want to talk about fear today. And fear really is, it's kind of a warning sign for something that we deem as unsafe or uncomfortable, right? That's kind of what fear is. And fear is just a big part of being human, right? Being human makes us realize that there is fear that will come. Right? Fear will come as a part of our human story. Since we're part of humanity, fear is inevitable. And fear has power. And I think fear, we have to realize the power of fear, because fear is something that we all hate, but something that we live with, right? We don't like to be afraid. We don't like when fear comes in, yet it's a part of our lives because fear has power. Right? Fear causes us to do some wild things, and we make irrational choices when fear comes, or we don't make any choices at all because we try and protect ourselves from the inevitable pain. We want to make sure that we don't have to deal with the pain, so we do whatever we can to protect ourselves from pain that we might see in the future as a part of our story. You know, fear causes us to freeze. It causes us often to give up morality and logical thinking. It has the ability to wreak havoc on our lives, on our businesses, on our churches, and on our families. This is what fear can do in our life. Fear can derail us. It can cause us to hide because we are afraid of truly being seen, fully being noticed, fully being known. And so it causes us to hide ourselves from one another, hide ourselves from each other, because we don't want people to know who we really are. It can cause us to make a poor business deal because we're afraid of letting people down. It can cause us to think small and act small. And so in turn, we do small. Because we feel like if we try too hard, if we put ourselves out there and we fail, what are people going to think about us? So we feel so inadequate and we feel so insecure. So we don't even attempt hard things. We only make decisions based on what is easy. I think for all of us as leaders, as pastors, as husbands or mothers or wives, when we look at our lives, fear has had this ability to take over and control everything that we do, because fear has the power to shape our future. This is what fear can do. It shapes our future, because the decisions we make today based off fear are to protect ourselves from something in the future. And the disciples, if you read through the scriptures, you read through in John 20, we see the disciples have a deep sense of panic and fear when Jesus has died, and they didn't know what to do. Right? They didn't know what was going to be next. Jesus was gone, right? We see this deep panic and deep fear because they didn't know what was going to happen next. And as followers of him, they understood that they were associated with them, and in turn, that could mean that they were going to experience the exact same thing that Jesus experienced on the cross when he gave his life for humanity. And in John 20, verse 19, this is what it says. It says, that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Right? They were afraid. When Sunday came, they were afraid, and they were meeting. They locked themselves in a room because they were afraid of the people who might do the same thing they saw Jesus go through. They were afraid for their lives. And I think they had a pretty good reason to be scared. I think they had a pretty good reason to be afraid. They had just seen the man they had dedicated 3 years of their lives to, with the experience of, they saw him experience utter defeat and humiliation. They'd seen him naked and beaten and humiliated and whipped and forced to carry his weapon of torture. They saw him nailed to a cross, a criminal's death, and they saw him take their last breath. Not exactly how I would want to spend my Friday evening. This is what they had just seen. And in their minds was, am I next? Are we going to be the next ones to have this happen to us? So they had locked themselves in the room. They had locked themselves, being like, we don't know what to do. Fear had led them to locking themselves up. In their minds, captivity was safer than freedom. And this is exactly what freedom does. It tricks us that the safest place to be is being locked in a room. Fear teaches us that captivity is more comfortable than facing our fears. It shows us that boldness and courage are things that stupid people do, right? Because that's going to put you in an unsafe place. It's going to put your life in danger. And so fear had captivated them, and so they had locked themselves in a room. And this is exactly what we tend to do. Fear comes and we lock ourselves in captivity because we feel the captivity of fear is safer. We feel that's where we're supposed to be over the freedom of faith. This is what happens when fear, it controls us so much that we feel safer in captivity. We feel safer in a locked room than we do in the freedom. And this concept was discovered in 1973, and maybe you've heard of the Stockholm Syndrome. It's a psychological response to being held captive. People with Stockholm Syndrome form a psychological connection with their captors and begin sympathizing with them. The condition gets its name from a bank robbery in 1973, an incident that happened in Stockholm, Sweden. During the 6-day standoff with police, many of the captive bank employees became sympathetic towards the bank robbers. After they were set free, some bank employees refused to testify against the bank robbers in court and even raise money for their defense. A criminologist and psychiatrist investigating the event developed the term Stockholm Syndrome to describe the affinity some bank employees showed towards their bank robbers. And I think for a lot of us, you look at this as the context of somebody being captive, but they actually grow this deep connection, this deep, weird, interesting connection to their abuser. I think for a lot of us, when we look at our lives, our abuser is fear. Our captor is fear. So we're so captivated, we're so under the control of fear that is where we are the most comfortable. We feel connected to fear. We've been in fear for so long that it's just become a part of our story, that it's just become a part of what we do. So every single decision that we make, every single decision we make for our business, every decision we make for our family, every decision we make for our church is fully based off of fear. It's fully based off of fear. So when something comes up, it's like, okay, what are we going to respond? It's like, how do we protect ourselves from future pain? How do we protect ourselves rather than how do we thrive? It's how can we survive? How can we survive this next attack? How can we survive this next thing? How can we survive it rather than saying, no, that we're going to face the fear and actually overcome it? We've locked ourselves in a room of fear because fear is where we become comfortable. Fear is where we've set up our camp. It's where we set up our tent, and that's where we live, is in a place of fear. So everything we do is based off of fear. Why? Because oftentimes fear is all that we know. Maybe fear has been taught to us from a young age. When it came to finances, maybe our parents, how they responded to the fear of finances was very poor. And because of that, we've learned that fear is how we need to make our decisions. Fear is why we need to do everything that we do. We've learned that fear is that. And I think the biggest question that we have to ask ourselves as leaders is, what scares me the most? What scares me the most? I think it's a question we all have to ask. What is it when I look at my future? What is it when I look at my past? What is it when I look at my present that is causing the most fear, causing the most anxiety in my life? What is it that's causing the most fear? And I think we all have things that bring up deep anxiety and gut-wrenching fear. I think we all probably know the feeling too well. Your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating, your knees are shaking, your stomach is churning, where you're face to face with the thing that scares you the most. The things that are keeping us up at night, the fear that cripples us, it leaves us stuck, it leaves us crying, it leaves us an emotional, spiritual, physical wreck. That fear, I think we all know too well. the voice that says you can't do it. Hiding from being face to face with our fear. We try and hide ourselves and lock ourselves. We feel like that hiding from the thing that's causing us fear is safer than pursuing it. It's safer than overcoming it. We feel it's safer to be locked in the room. We feel it's safer to be a captive to fear. We feel it's safer to make all our decisions based off of fear. And so when we do that, it leaves us so stuck in fear that fear has become our highest motivator and our highest supplier. It's become everything in our life. We've locked ourselves in the room of fear. What is it in your life that is causing you the most fear right now? What is it? You know, I can't speak for you. I don't know what it is that's causing you the most fear when it comes to your past, present, or future. I don't know. But I think it's really important for us to realize what's causing us the most fear. And oftentimes our deepest fears are in a few categories according to psychologists. And you might look at these and realize this might be where you are when it comes to fear, what your biggest fears are right now. And number one would be extinction. The fear of annihilation or of ceasing to exist. This is a more fundamental way to express it than just fear of death. The idea of no longer being arouses a primarily existential anxiety in all normal humans, considering that panicky feeling you get when you're looking over the edge of a high building. One time I went to the Grand Canyon and you just see the vast, massive cliffs and you think about, whoa, like I don't want to get too close to the edge, right? That type of fear where it's like, this could be the end of my life, right? Number two would be mutilation, the fear of losing any part of our precious bodily structure, the thought of having our bodies and boundaries invaded or losing integrity of an organ, body part, or natural function. Anxiety about animals such as bugs, spiders, snakes, and other creepy things arises from the fear of mutilation, right? We're afraid that we're going to lose part of who we are, lose part of it. Number three is loss of autonomy, the fear of being immobilized, paralyzed, restricted, enveloped, overwhelmed, entrapped, imprisoned, smothered, or otherwise controlled by circumstances beyond our control. In physical form, it's commonly known as claustrophobia, but it also extends to our social interactions and relationships. Number four would be separation, the fear of abandonment, rejection, and loss of connectedness, of becoming a non-person, not wanted, respected, or valued by anyone else. The silent treatment, when imposed by a group, can have a devastating effect on its target. And then number five would be ego death, the fear of humiliation or shame or any other mechanism of profound self-disapproval that threatens the loss of integrity of the self. The fear of the shattering of one's constructed sense of lovability, capability, and worthiness. So number one, extinction. Two, mutilation. Three, loss of autonomy. Four, separation, and five, ego death. What is it in your life that scares you the most? What scares you the most, I think, will reveal our deepest insecurities. When we look at our lives, I think there's a lot of things that we're afraid of. Maybe we look at our future, and the thing we're most afraid of is financial stability. We look at our lives, at our spending habits. We look at our expenses. We look at our savings accounts. We think, man, when I look in the future, I don't know how we're going to make it through. I don't know how we're going to make it through this year. I don't know how we're going to make it through what's next. We have these fears that come up inside of us when it looks at our future, when it comes to our finances. For others of us, it might be our health. We look at our health and we look at some of the decisions we've made over the past 10, 20 years, and we think, man, how many of these poor decisions that I made is causing me to be so unhealthy right now? We don't even know if we're going to make it through the year when it comes to our physical health. We're looking at our future, and the future scares us because we don't know if we're going to be around. Some of us, when we look in our future, we just see our lives right now and our present is so lonely. We look at our future and think, what about the future? Will I have people to be connected with? Will I have friends? Will I get married? Will I be able to have kids? Will I be able to have this? Sometimes that's our biggest fear is, will I be connected? Will I have friends? Will I have people to be in community with? That oftentimes is our biggest fear. But again, what scares you most will reveal your deepest insecurities. And you might not be willing to take a risk because of humiliation. Failure is one of the biggest fears that people have, is failure. We think that if we fail, people won't want to be around us, right? The risk might be quitting your job to run a business. The risk might be applying for school in your late 30s, being like, I think I might be a little old for this. The risk might be facing your criticism and learning from it. The risk might be persecution based off your beliefs or based off of your faith. The risk of standing up for what you believe in. We always think it's safer to lock ourselves in the room of security in order to protect our image. What this means is that we value our image or how people view us as more important than living a life of purpose. We believe that we value our image, how people view us, what people think about us, how we look on social media, how we look to our colleagues, how we look to our church, how we look to our family. We care more about how people see us than living a life of purpose. See, fear will always tell us to not take chances. And fear will always tell us to not try something new. Fear will always tell us to not do it. Why? Because what if we fail? One of the biggest insecurities, one of the biggest fears we have is failure. Because fear causes us to want to impress people more than we want to build something sustainable, generational, and enjoyable. We think that if we impress the right people and do what they want, not what we need, then we will be able to be successful. We are so scared to be the true versions of ourselves that our whole mission on earth is to make people like us. That's what fear will do in your life. What it does is it makes you so focused on being what everybody else needs from you that you don't even realize who you truly are. The most courageous and brave people who have walked this earth have faced adversity head on. They knew humiliation would come. They knew pain would follow. They knew sacrifice was necessary. They knew it wouldn't be comfortable, yet they followed adventure and risk over comfort and safety. They changed the world. They changed their circumstance. They changed their environments around them because they realized that when you're locked in fear, you're not going anywhere. When you've locked yourself in fear, when the disciples, they were in the room, they had locked themselves in the room, they were stuck. They can't go forward. There's no movement. There's no momentum that builds because you're so stuck. And a lot of us in our lives, we're so stuck in fear that we're not going to go anywhere. We're never going to make it. We're never going to be more productive. We're never going to get there. Why? Because we've trapped ourselves, we've gotten ourselves stuck in a locked room of fear that we realize we're never going to make it on our own. And so we just stop going forward. We stop making good decisions. We stop living a life of purpose because we're stuck. But people who live a life of adventure, people who go forward and don't let fear control them, they're the ones who are changing the world. Why? Because they're not getting themselves stuck. They're pushing past obstacles. They're overcoming mountains. They're trekking through the wildest places in order to see the future that they believe God has created them to live. They don't let fear control the outcome of their future. You know, if you might not be willing to be honest with your boss or honest with your spouse for fear of them lashing out, fear of them firing you, or fear of them leaving you. You know, we're afraid of the response someone might have to us asking for justice. We're afraid of the response for somebody, so we never actually speak up. We're afraid that if we do, we'll get fired. If we share how we truly feel, they're going to let us go. If we tell our spouse the things about them that they need to work on, their blind spots, we're afraid that they're going to yell at us. We're afraid they're going to hurt us. We're afraid they're going to leave us. That's the fear that a lot of us have. You know, our fear for our safety causes us to not be true to ourselves, to not be true to our own convictions, to not be true to what we feel like we desperately need in relationship, what we desperately need in community. It causes us to not even live those things out. We think that locking ourselves in a room of silence is the safest place. So we stay silent. We don't ask to be treated fairly. We put up with abuse. We put up with unfair treatment to try and keep the peace. Make sure everyone's okay. I'm going to take care of myself last. We don't want to put up a fight because fighting is more exhausting than being silent. You know, Harvey Goldberg said this: what you tolerate is what you get, and that becomes your culture. If you tolerate people mistreating you, if you tolerate abuse, if you tolerate it because you're not willing to talk about it, you want to stay silent in it, if you tolerate it, then you have to expect that to be your normal. Because you're tolerating, you're not fighting for yourself. You're not stepping out and saying, no, it's gonna be okay. We need to learn that what we tolerate is what we get. I'm sure you've seen this. I'm sure you've seen people going from abusive relationship to abusive relationship. They are constantly finding the wrong people who treat them poorly over and over and over and over and over and over again, back to people who hurt them, back to abusive people. We see this time and time again in human story. You have to learn your value. You have to understand how important you are and how you deserve to be treated. You have to understand this. Fear causes us to lose our value. Fear, what it does is it tells us that we're not valuable enough, we're not strong enough, we're not good enough, so we need to make every decision we have to make sure that we are fully protected, fully taken care of, and fully in a place where we're going to be okay because we feel like we can't go forward. Fear lies to you. Fear tells you can't do it. We have to stop being so afraid. Someone once said this. He said, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. The best time to overcome fear was 20 years ago. The best time to unlock the door of fear, to let yourself back out into the freedom, was 20 years ago. The best time to stop letting fear control you was 20 years ago. But the second best time is right now. The second best time to let go of fear and to overcome fear, to unlock the door, is right now. It might be time to stand up and start fighting back. It might be time to stand up above your fear and walk in faith to overcome the fear that's trying to control you, that has been controlling you for so many years. It's time to stand up and start fighting. Whatever fear you're facing, I truly believe it's time to unlock the door. It's time to stop living in captivity of fear and start to live in the freedom of faith. Your family needs a mother who acts by faith and not by fear. Your business needs a leader who walks with courage. Your church needs a pastor who leads with vision to thrive and not just survive. Your children need a father who doesn't let his fear control his outcome. Your spouse needs a partner who pushes past fear with boldness to create space for safety and honesty. Facing fear takes courage, and facing fear takes strength. It forces us out of the comfort of captivity into the vulnerability of the battle. The battle might seem scary. The decisions might seem big, but don't let fear dictate your future. The best time to unlock the door of fear was 20 years ago, but the second best time to do this is right now. It's time to unlock the door. If we go back to that verse in John 20, Verse 19 says, that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. Suddenly, Jesus was standing there among them. Peace be with you, he said. You know, I want to encourage you that as you step out in faith, as you push past fear, as you learn to overcome fear in your life, you aren't going alone. You're never going into the battle alone. You're never unlocking the door of fear alone. Jesus goes with you. When you are in the midst of the ongoing battle, Jesus is fighting beside you. He is giving you peace. He is giving you reassurance. He will encourage you. And again, the disciples, they've locked themselves in the room for fear of the Jewish leaders. They didn't know what the future was going to look like. The last thing they expected was Jesus to show up, right? It says suddenly Jesus was standing there among them. He said, peace be with you. I think for a lot of us, we're afraid to push past fear because we don't know what the outcome's going to be, and that's really it. We don't know what the future's going to look like. We don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. We don't know what's going to happen if we stand up and start fighting. We don't know what's going to happen if we unlock the door. We don't know what's on the other side of the door. But I want to encourage you, you're never going alone. Jesus goes with you. It's time to unlock the door and step back into the beauty of faith. Faith allows us to take the first step out the door. It's one step at a time. Take one step, then the next step, then the next step, then the next step, and keep going forward. I can't tell you how many times in my own life fear has crippled me. A decision is looming when it comes to my health. A decision is looming when it comes to our church. A decision is looming, and I have to make the decision. I can't just ask somebody else to make it for me. I have to make the decision, and fear has crippled me, where I make decisions irrationally because I'm so scared. When it even comes to being a parent, you have a child who's sick. It's one of the hardest places to be. And then sometimes there's fear that comes in. Is my child going to be okay? Will my child make it? Some of these fears come that are so deep and so real, and they start to cripple us. So we start making such poor decisions and acting out of anger, acting out of fear, rather than acting out of faith. It's time to unlock the door and step back out into the beauty of faith. I heard this story once of this man whose father was an alcoholic, and he had tried to quit time and time and time again, trying to quit. And one day he came to his son and said, "Son, I'm done." And his son looked at him and said, "Dad, how do you know? How do you know you're going to make it? You've tried so many times." He's like, "How do you know that this is the time?" His dad said, "No, I don't know. I don't know this is the time." But he said, "All I know is that I can go one more day. I can keep going one more day." And I think for all of us, that's what faith is. Faith is an opportunity to say, I'm going to go one more day. I'm going to go one more moment. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going one day at a time. You have enough strength to get through today because his mercies are new for you every morning. And so each day you have enough for the day. You have enough for that day. You might not have enough for tomorrow, but wait till tomorrow and new mercies come. So I really want to encourage you that as you step out of faith, as you unlock the door and you open the doors wide open into the battlefield, Jesus goes with you. His mercies are new for you every morning. And I want to encourage you that God and Jesus will continue to guide you and protect you and show up and bring you the peace that you desperately, desperately need. Faith allows us to take that step out the door and take the next step and the next step. You have enough energy to go one more day. And when we start to walk in faith and not fear, what happens is that we become more productive, we become more influential, our voice carries more weight because people trust us because they've seen us overcome time and time and time again. It'll help us become more stronger as we take the steps of faith into the future. Because fear isn't holding us back, it's propelling us into the future. Let fear be something that indicates the danger and then pushes you to do something about it, to be the overcomer, to not be the victim, but to be the victor. I want to encourage you with that today. I truly believe that you can do this, and I believe that we can do this together.
Thank you for joining us today for the Known Podcast. We have new content coming out every Wednesday, so make sure to come back next week for a new episode. If you haven't yet, make sure to follow us on Instagram @Known Podcast and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. See you next week.